Am I the a-hole for not allowing my brother to be in my wedding after he basically took my family? I'm 35 now, and it feels like the past several years of my life could fill a book with drama and heartbreak. The whole saga begins back when my dad passed away. That was a tough time for me and my younger brother, who was still in college then. His studies were important, and I didn't want his future to get sidetracked because of our loss. So I took on the responsibility of keeping us both afloat. I couldn't pursue my own dreams of going to college because I had to work several jobs. It was a sacrifice, but one I made willingly to support my family, which at the time included my then wife and our young son. My brother couldn't afford rent on his student budget, so I invited him to stay with us. It seemed like the right thing to do. Initially, it was good. He was like an uncle to my son and helped around the house. However, as time went on, the stress of juggling work, a rocky marriage, and extended family living with us began to take its toll. My marriage started to deteriorate. Arguments with my wife became more frequent and more intense. It was during this chaotic time that I made a shocking and painful discovery. My brother was having an affair with my wife. This betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the profound betrayal by two people I had trusted the most. I divorced my ex-wife, but the saga didn't end there. In a twist that felt like it was out of a soap opera, my brother married her in less than a year after our divorce. The divorce proceedings were tough. I fought hard to get full custody of my son, wanting to protect him from the unstable environment my ex and brother now provided. Unfortunately, the court decided on shared custody. My ex-wife painted a picture of me as the problem in our marriage, using our past issues, which were now compounded by the current situation, to her advantage. Living through this period was like navigating a daily minefield of emotions. I was devastated, angry, and felt a profound sense of loss, not just for my marriage, but for the brotherly relationship that was irrevocably damaged. He didn't just betray me, he stepped into my life, taking my role as a husband and then attempting to do the same as a father. My son, who is 7 and very bright, found himself in the middle of this complicated family drama. My brother has been pushing him to start calling him dad, which has led to several heated and painful arguments between us. The thought that my brother is attempting to erase me from my son's life is something I find unbearable. Now, amidst this storm, I've found some solace and happiness. I'm engaged to be married to a wonderful woman who is empathetic and supportive. She has been a rock during these turbulent times, understanding my pain and standing by me as we plan our future together. However, even this happy occasion has become a battleground of family opinions. My aunt, with whom I've always had a close relationship, surprised me by suggesting that I invite my brother to my wedding. She argued that it would be a good opportunity for reconciliation. This suggestion was echoed by other family members, who insisted that it could be a chance for healing. They even tried to ease my discomfort by saying that my ex-wife wouldn't need to attend. My brother, they mentioned, wanted to make amends and thought my wedding would be the perfect setting for this. At first, I laughed off the suggestion, unable to believe that after everything, a wedding invitation could mend such deep wounds. But the laughter soon gave way to frustration as the family pressure mounted. They couldn't see how painful it was for me to even consider this. My fiancé, trying to understand my refusal, wondered if my strong reaction was because I still had unresolved feelings for my ex. But it's not about lingering feelings for her, it's about the betrayal and the ongoing hurt my brother causes, particularly concerning my son. Despite my family's arguments, I stood firm on my decision. Reconciliation, if it ever happens, can't be forced or staged at my wedding, which should be a celebration of new beginnings, not old wounds. The family's pushback has been intense. They accuse me of holding grudges and being unforgiving. They worry about how this stance affects my image, especially in the eyes of my fiancé. It's a lot to process. On one hand, I have my upcoming marriage, a beacon of hope and happiness. On the other, there's the unresolved chaos of my past, pulling at the seams of my present. Inviting my brother to my wedding feels like it would validate his actions, something I am not ready to do. This decision has put me at odds with family members who believe in forgiveness at all costs, but I feel they're asking too much of me too soon. I'm left pondering how to balance these conflicting pressures. How do I maintain peace within my family while staying true to my feelings? How do I protect my future from the shadows of my past? These questions hang heavy as I plan my wedding, hoping to start afresh, while the echoes of past betrayals linger in the background, shaping my decisions and my relationships. Now for the top comments before the update. Not the a-hole. Honestly, if you are not comfortable with him being that, they need to respect that. I mean, I find it highly insane that they think there is a mending the fence option. Brother burnt that bridge down and continued to pour gas to the fire to ensure it doesn't stop smoldering. The family members were asking if he can stay home too. They're all criticizing my decision and asking me how that looks like for my fiancé. It looks like you have some self-respect, not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. And I'd be tearing your fiancé a new one as well. Do you really want to get married to a person who throws that at you? Your family are ridiculous. Cut him off. He's now just your ex-wife's new husband. Your brother is dead to you. And dead people don't come to weddings. I completely agree. My brother will not be attending my wedding. He chose my ex-wife over his sibling and took my family from me. I consider that unforgivable, and he will have to live with the consequences. Family doesn't do what he did. If he actually wants to have a better relationship, the least he can do is let my child know that he only has one daddy me and not try to replace me. He should also tell his fiancée if he still wants to salvage the relationship that he has no feelings for his ex-wife. She made her choice to follow his brother. The brother isn't invited because he did something unforgivable. Period. Not the whole. Regardless of what took place, it's still you and your fiancé. A wedding. If you don't want them there, they can't be there. If anyone has a problem with that, they don't have to show up either. Hope you find happiness, Opie. Not the a-hole. Why is the whole family telling you to bend for your brother? Why didn't they defend you when he literally tore your family apart after taking advantage of your generosity? Why is the burden of forgiveness left on you when he continues to actively do vicious things like convince your son to call him dad? If you haven't decided on party favors for your wedding, I would recommend mirrors so your family can take a long look at themselves to see the hypocrisy that is plain on their faces. Update 1. Since my last post, tensions have only escalated with my family over the decision not to invite my brother to my upcoming wedding. Despite clearly explaining my stance and the reasons behind it, my family continues to push back, which has been incredibly stressful. In a recent family gathering that was meant to be a simple dinner, things took a turn for the worse. My aunt, who has been particularly vocal about me reconciling with my brother, brought him up again. She argued that weddings are about family unity and forgiveness, which sparked a heated debate at the table. To my dismay, my brother was also unexpectedly brought to the dinner by another relative who thought it would be a good opportunity for us to clear the air. The moment he walked in, the atmosphere tensed up significantly. My brother, rather than being conciliatory, took a more confrontational approach. He made a snide remark about how I was still holding on to the past and even suggested that my reluctance to include him in the wedding was more about my unresolved feelings towards my ex-wife than about the betrayal I felt from him. He accused me of using him as a scapegoat for the failure of my marriage and not being man enough to handle my issues directly with my ex. My brother's words were cutting, and unfortunately, they did not stop there. He continued by saying that he was a better father figure to my son than I ever was, claiming that my son prefers the stability he and my ex-wife could offer over the supposed bitterness and anger I was nurturing. I was furious and deeply hurt by his accusations. The situation escalated quickly, and I ended up leaving the dinner early, feeling betrayed not just by my brother, but by the family members who seemed to support his narrative. Since that night, I've had several conversations with my fiancée, who, despite earlier misunderstandings, has been incredibly supportive. She witnessed the entire exchange that night and saw firsthand the toxic dynamics I was trying to avoid by not inviting my brother to our wedding. She agreed that the environment my brother and my ex-wife were creating was not healthy for my son, and we discussed taking further steps to ensure his well-being. In light of all this, I've decided to seek legal counsel again to see if there are any adjustments that can be made to the custody arrangement, given the hostile environment my brother is fostering, especially with his attempts to replace me as a father figure in my son's life. As for my family, the divide has only deepened, and while it pains me to become estranged from them, my priority is the health and happiness of my own immediate family, my son and my fiancé. I need to protect them and myself from further harm. I appreciate the support from those who have shared similar experiences and offered advice. It has helped me feel less alone in this struggle. I'll continue to update as things develop. Thank you for standing by me. Story 2. Am I the a-hole for not supporting my cousin's relationship? I'm a 27-year-old woman, and my cousin, who is now 23, has been one of the closest people in my life for many years. Our bond strengthened significantly when she turned 16. We started doing almost everything together, from shopping trips to late-night movie marathons. When she turned 18, she even moved in with me for a bit. During that time, she became more like a little sister to me than just a cousin. We shared secrets, supported each other through tough times, and celebrated good times together. At the same age, I was deeply in love with a man named Mark, who was also 27. Mark and I had a serious relationship. We talked about the future a lot marriage, kids, the whole dream. But when I was 25, those dreams shattered. Mark confessed that he had been lying about wanting those things, marriage and kids, for the entire time we were together. This revelation devastated me. I felt betrayed, not just because he didn't want the future I did, but because he had deceived me for so long. It was a tough period, and the breakup that followed was messy and painful. Throughout this ordeal, my cousin was my rock. She was there for me, offering her shoulder to cry on and giving me the strength to move forward. I leaned on her heavily, and her support meant the world to me. However, about a month ago, things took a turn that I never saw coming. My cousin excitedly announced she was pregnant and engaged. I was thrilled for her initially. Seeing her happy made me happy too. She organized a family cookout to celebrate, and I went there full of joy, ready to meet the man who had made her so happy. But that joy evaporated the moment I arrived at the cookout. The man she was engaged to, the man who was the father of her unborn child, was none other than Mark, my ex-fiancé. The shock was like a physical blow. I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. My cousin, my closest confidant, was marrying the man who had broken my heart. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't even speak. I just turned around and left the cookout without a word. In the days that followed, my phone was flooded with calls and messages from my family and my cousin, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The betrayal felt too deep, too raw. About a week later, I finally answered a call from my cousin. She tried to explain, saying she understood how weird and difficult the situation was, but that Mark was going to be family now, and she needed me to support her. She pleaded with me to be happy for her. But I couldn't. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too stark. I told her I couldn't support her choice and asked her not to contact me again. Following this, my family began to pressure me. They argued that what was done and that I needed to get over it for the sake of my cousin, who was getting married and having a baby. They told me it was an exciting time for the family and that I should put my feelings aside. This response from them made me feel even more isolated and misunderstood. How could they expect me to just forget what happened and celebrate with them? Feeling hurt and angry, I finally snapped. I told everyone who sided with her that they could forget about contacting me again. To me, family meant loyalty and support, not betrayal and pain. My family did not take my reaction well. They called me unreasonable, bitter, and even cruel. They argued that it had been 2 years since my breakup with Mark, that no one owns a person, and that I needed to accept the situation and move on. They accused me of holding a grudge and said that my inability to let go was not a good look, especially in front of my fiancé. Faced with their lack of understanding and compassion, I made the difficult decision to block them all. Now I find myself at a crossroads, trying to reconcile my past with my future. I'm planning a life with my fiancé, who has been a source of comfort and understanding through this turmoil, yet I'm also mourning the loss of the close relationship I once had with my cousin. Navigating this new reality is challenging. I'm left wondering how to heal from this betrayal, and how to build a future without those who were once so integral to my life. It's a painful process, but necessary for my own well-being and for the healthy start of my new family with my fiancé. Am I the a-hole? Now for the top comments. Most definitely not the a-hole. What she did was terrible. She knew you all were together for all those years and broken up, and she still dated him. That's basically betraying you. I'm sorry you have to go through that. I bet it started before they broke up too. Went from girlfriend's cousin to baby mom. And real quick. And is nobody curious why these two were even in contact after the split? Especially if cousin was comforting Opie. Honestly, the fact that they both knew about the relationship drama, got together so soon after your major breakup, and kept their relationship from you, only to reveal it in a suitably dramatic moment in front of your entire family, makes me wonder if they didn't do this to you deliberately. If this is an exciting time for the family, how come you didn't hear a thing about your cousin's mysterious fiancé until she could spring this on you? Not the a-hole for going. No contact after that. From what you say, it seems that Mark told you he didn't want children, when you had been under the impression that he did, that he's celebrating his impending fatherhood so soon after he ended a long-term relationship over. Exactly. That issue. Makes me wonder if he was already interested in your cousin and was lying to you in order to break your relationship off. I'm just an internet speculator, so take that with a grain of salt. But I've heard of scenarios like that before. I agree with everything in your first paragraph, but I'm assuming it was the other way around. Marks. I was telling her he did not want children, knowing she was child-free, and then later revealing he actually did want children. So they broke up for that reason, because he admitted he did want kids and she wasn't going to change her mind. And then he chose Opie's cousin to be the woman he'd have a child with when he couldn't get her to do it. Absolutely crap of him. Not the a-hole. Your cousin can marry whom she likes, but you don't have to be there for it. I'm sure it's tough on your family too, but it's disappointing that they are all siding with her after you were in a relationship with this guy for 12 years, including engagement. Story 3. Am I the a-hole for telling off my daughter for a horrible comment towards her sister, even though she feels like she's correct and justified? My older daughter is now 31, and my younger daughter is 27. 4 years ago, my older daughter's fiancé left her for my younger daughter a month before their wedding. Yes, it is as terrible as it sounds. Made even worse by the fact that my younger daughter was 2 months along in her pregnancy. I was extremely disappointed in my younger daughter. They both claimed they were in love and are still married till now. It literally destroyed our family. My older daughter has banned her sister from coming around her, which everyone has been accommodating all these years. It makes holidays very stressful, but it is what it is. I've tried my best to have a good relationship with my grandchild while navigating the family issues. My older daughter has made very cruel comments about my grandchild, which I've ignored. That's a mistake on my part for not shutting it down. In February, my elder daughter dropped by her house unexpectedly and encountered my younger daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild. It was very tense, and my younger daughter broke down in tears and tried apologizing again, and revealed to us that my grandchild was likely on the autism spectrum. And my oldest daughter immediately replied by saying that it's sad that the karma of cheating parents is inflicted on the children, and that maybe this will be a lesson for my younger daughter. My son-in-law and my oldest daughter got into a huge fight, and everyone left in tears. I've always been sympathetic to my older daughter and have usually taken her side, but I think what she said is extremely out of line and mean. I told her that what she said was unacceptable and that she needs to apologize or I will not be having her over anymore. She then told me that my parenting is atrocious and it's no wonder my younger daughter turned out to be a bad word. I've clearly messed up somewhere too. Have raised two daughters who've made such cruel judgments. But am I wrong for taking a stand on this issue? Both my daughters were lovely people with a lot of success, but our whole family is so angry and sad now. My oldest daughter is the complete opposite of who she used to be, but she refuses to go to therapy, even when I offer to pay for it and come with her if she wants. I'm just heartbroken. Now for the top comments. You're the a-hole. I'm giving the older daughter a pass because her comment was justified. Let's break down exactly why. Finding out your fiancé was cheating a month before the wedding is a huge blow. I can't imagine how horrible it would be to find out that it was with your own sister and that she was pregnant. That is grounds for permanently removing those two from your life. Now we have the mother. What was her reaction? I'm extremely disappointed in sister, but she gave us the first grandchild, so I'm not going to rock the boat too hard. You make the holidays work, so it's obvious. She has seen very little to no actual repercussions for what they did. Now, older daughter simply suggests the sister is getting her comeuppance and that she feels sorry for the child. And this is where you make your stand. This is the breaking point. A step too far. Jesus, Opie. Could you make it any more obvious how much you favor your younger daughter? Your older daughter is right. Your parenting is atrocious. My oldest daughter is the complete opposite of who she used to be. No crap, Sherlock. Her fiancé cheated with her younger sister, and her family decided that was perfectly fine. While therapy probably would be helpful for her, therapy needs to be with someone you trust. Why would she want you there? You've more than shown her where your loyalties lie. Editing to ask for a lot of comments. I never said the oldest daughter's comment wasn't an asshole comment. But if you think the actions are justified, then you don't give them an SH. The majority of my original comment addresses the justification, but there are other things as well. Older daughter wasn't the first to bring up autism. Her sister threw it in her face to garner sympathy. Older daughter isn't blaming any of this on the innocent child, and in fact feels sorry the child might be a vessel for karmic retribution. This is putting everything on the parents. If she wants to believe autism is a punishment, I agree. That is an asshole move, but I still feel her comment to her sister was justified, and the older sister's views on disabilities do not in any way reflect my own. 1. Your youngest and her husband are whole. What your eldest said sounds hurtful, but it didn't hurt the child. The baby's not any less or more autistic for what she said. I'd argue nothing has changed for the baby at all. After your eldest said that your youngest and her husband should be the ones trying to fix this. Now, for the last story. Am I the a-hole for telling my mother that my stepdad will not be walking me down the aisle because I hate him and in turn ripping my family apart? I'm 23, and I've been looking forward to this particular June for a long time. It's when I'm getting married to my boyfriend of 6 years. We're planning a big celebration because my fiance comes from a large family and we've got a wide circle of friends. I've always imagined this day as one filled with joy, surrounded by the people we love. However, my side of the family is much smaller. It's mostly just my mom, as I never knew my dad. I also have an aunt and an uncle who chose not to have kids. Growing up, I've always seen my uncle as a father figure, especially since my biological father was never in the picture. My mom married my stepdad when I was 12, but to put it mildly, I've never warmed up to him. He has a way of making every conversation uncomfortable. He's often mean-spirited and makes racist, sexist, and transphobic comments that are really just for shock value. During my teenage years, his behavior significantly contributed to my struggles with mental health and an eating disorder. For years, I tried to communicate my feelings about him to my mom, hoping she might see just how harmful his behavior was. But around the age of 15, I stopped trying. She always defended him, insisting that beneath his harsh exterior was a good man who would never intentionally hurt us. This response from her made me feel unheard and isolated, so I eventually stopped sharing.
I pulled into the driveway of Tristan's house, heart swelling with excitement to surprise my sweet grandson Eli on his 8th birthday. Little did I know the surprise would be entirely mine, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. The doorbell went unanswered after several rings, so I tried the handle. Unlocked. "Hello? Tristan? Nadia?" I called out, letting myself inside. An eerie silence blanketed the house, normally filled with the laughter and pitter-patter of little feet. A muffled whimper drew me towards the staircase. Under the stairs, a small door caught my eye, the kind meant for storage, not for... No, the thought was too horrifying to entertain. "Eli? Honey, are you in there?" I gasped, chest tightening. "Grandma?" His tiny voice trembled from behind the door. "Help me, please." With shaking hands, I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, each more disturbing than the next. I steadied myself against the wall, guilt and dread crashing over me in waves for not visiting sooner. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a toolbox and grabbed a hammer, my fragile grasp on composure crumbling. "Stand back, sweetie." 3 solid strikes, and the flimsy door splintered open. There he was, my beautiful grandson, cowering in the dimly lit space, eyes wide with fear and relief. Tears stained his pale cheeks, his vibrant red hair matted and unkempt. "Oh, Eli." I choked out, scooping him into my arms, cradling him close. He clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart into pieces. I'm so sorry, I mumbled into his hair, cursing myself for 1,000 should-haves and could-haves. His small body trembled like a leaf against me. Once the initial shock subsided, a burning rage replaced the sorrow. How could Tristan and Nadia do this? What kind of parents? No, what kind of human beings? "It's okay, honey, you're safe now," I assured him, doing my best to keep my tone even and soothing, despite the maelstrom within. "Can you tell me how long?" He shook his head fiercely, eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memories. "Too long. Days, I think. I'd yell and bang, but they never came. Just slid food under sometimes." White-hot fury coursed through my veins, and I silently vowed to ensure Tristan and Nadia paid for this unforgivable cruelty towards their own flesh and blood. But first, I needed to get Eli out of this house of horrors. "Pack a bag. Anything you want to take with you. We're leaving." My tone brooked no argument. He nodded obediently, looking smaller and frailer than any child should. By the time I'd calmed down enough to call Tristan, the rage had crystallized into a cold, hard knot of determination in my gut. He picked up after several rings, utterly nonchalant, like he hadn't just committed one of the worst betrayals a parent could. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Those 3 words, spoken so casually, were the spark that ignited my fury into an inferno. "What do you mean, what's up?" I snarled into the phone, my fury simmering just below the surface. "I'm at your house, and I just found Eli locked in a closet under the stairs." There was a brief pause, and I could practically see Tristan's nonchalant shrug through the phone. "So, that's just how we discipline him when he misbehaves. He knows the rules." My jaw dropped, revulsion churning in my gut. How could he be so callous about treating his own son like a prisoner? "You can't be serious, Tristan. He's just a little boy. Don't you dare try to tell me how to parent my own kid, Mom." His voice took on an unpleasant edge. "You're overreacting as usual. He's fine, just throwing one of his tantrums." "Overreacting? You locked your 8-year-old child in a cramped, dark space for days with barely any food or human contact. What's wrong with you? I was practically shouting now, anger and disbelief warring within me. We have it under control, he said with an infuriating calmness that made my blood boil. This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it. I opened my mouth to unleash another verbal lashing, but the dial tone cut me off. He'd hung up. Chest heaving, I stared at my trembling hands as a chilling realization crept over me. This was no one-time disciplinary tactic gone too far. The way Tristan had spoken, so coldly and matter-of-fact, hinted at something much more sinister. An ingrained pattern of cruelty, of depriving an innocent child of his basic rights and needs. Shaking my head, I leaned back against the wall, fighting against the swell of nausea. How could my own son, my flesh and blood, be capable of such monstrous behavior? What kind of person had he become while I wasn't watching? Unbidden, memories flickered through my mind. Happy childhood moments, Tristan's bright smile and pealing laughter as we baked cookies or played in the yard. It felt like a lifetime ago, those echoes of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. Where had I gone wrong? What had warped and twisted him into this shell of a man? Or had the seeds of cruelty lurked beneath the surface all along, only to bloom once I looked away? A tiny sniffle made me jerk upright. Eli stood in the hallway, bag clutched to his chest, eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Of course he'd overheard every ugly word. Crossing the room in 2 long strides, I gathered him into my arms, murmuring soft, soothing words into his hair. "It's gonna be okay, honey. I'm gonna make sure they never ever hurt you again." And in that moment, as his small arms wound around my neck, my path became clear. No more agonizing over where Tristan had strayed. It didn't matter now. He was beyond reach, beyond saving maybe. But Eli, that sweet, innocent little boy, still had a chance at a decent life. A life full of kindness, love, and stability that every child deserved. Even if it meant waging war against my own son, I would stop at nothing to rescue him from this nightmare. Settling Eli into the passenger seat, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you pick a movie for us to watch at my place? Something with happy endings." He nodded, mustering up a watery grin that tugged at my heart. In that moment, I made a silent vow. By the time we reached our happy ending, Tristan would face the consequences for his unforgivable crimes. No matter what it took, I would make sure of it. The drive back to my place was a blur, my mind spinning with half-formed plans of how to handle the situation with Tristan and Nadia. One thing was certain, I couldn't take them on alone. I needed allies. My first call was to Dale, my estranged husband. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, our marriage slowly eroding until the distance became a chasm. But he was still Eli's grandfather, and I had to hope some shred of paternal instinct remained. "Dale, it's Lorraine," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need your help with something." There was a pregnant pause, then a resigned sigh. "What is it this time?" Clenching my jaw, I willed myself to remain calm. "It's about Eli, our grandson." That seemed to get his attention. "Go on." The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush. Eli's captivity, Tristan's shocking dismissal of it all, my own fears for the boy's well-being. To his credit, Dale listened in stone-faced silence until I finally trailed off. "You're telling me our son had his own kid locked up, like some kind of prisoner?" His voice was dangerously low. "Yes." I glanced over at Eli, slumped against the window in an exhausted sleep. And judging by how casual Tristan was about it, I don't think this was the first time. Another heavy pause then. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. We'll have those 2 psychos arrested for child endangerment." "Wait," I cut him off sharply. As satisfying as that idea was, it felt too rash, too risky. "We can't go to the authorities until we have rock-solid proof. You know how the system can fail kids." "So what do you suggest?" My gaze settled on Eli's sleeping form, and a steely resolve solidified within me. "We need to investigate on our own first. Figure out exactly what's going on and gather evidence of any wrongdoing, so it's airtight." "You want us to perform a full background check on our own son?" Dale sounded skeptical. "On both of them," I clarified grimly. "There has to be some explanation for why they're treating Eli so horrendously. We find that, we'll get to the bottom of this whole mess." A heavy silence then. "Fine, but not because I care about that boy's welfare anymore." His voice dripped with disdain. "Just Because he's my grandson, bloodline and all that. I bristled at his callousness, but bit back a scathing retort. I'd deal with Dale's indifference towards Eli later. For now, I had to play along if I wanted a hope of gaining his help. Okay then, we start digging into their lives first thing tomorrow. Finances, personal records, everything. No stone left unturned. Dale grunted in assent. And if we find anything? A burst of vindictive satisfaction surged through me. Then we make them pay. The next few days passed by in a whirlwind of information gathering. Between my tenacious research skills and Dale's business connections, we slowly unpicked every tangled thread of Tristan and Nadia's lives. Their finances were in shambles, racked with debt and comic strings of bad investments. A large portion of debt seemed tied to Nadia's previous marriage, which ended messily and likely cost a small fortune in legal fees. Speaking of her ex, I made a point to track him down. The details he shared painted an ugly picture of Nadia's past: accusations of infidelity, substance abuse, even violence. Could she still be clinging to those toxic patterns? As for Tristan, there were signs of shady business dealings and despicable con artistry. Several former employers and partners had fallen victim to his schemes over the years. Had he been grooming Eli as his next payday? You think they've been stealing from the kid? Dale wondered grimly when I shared my suspicions. Seems like the type of lowlife move they'd pull. I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea crashing over me. The more I learned, the more monstrous my own son and daughter-in-law became. Raking a hand through my hair, I turned to face Dale with a look of grim determination. Well, we can't let them get away with it any longer. It's time we put an end to their sick games. With our findings laid out before us, Dale and I began plotting our next moves. We had more than enough damning evidence against Tristan and Nadia. Now it was a matter of using it effectively. We could release it all to the media, let them crucify those two jackals in the court of public opinion, Dale suggested with relish. I shook my head, worrying my bottom lip. As satisfying as that would be, we can't. Not yet. It would just put Eli in the crosshairs and make him the victim all over again. Then what? Take it to the cops like I originally suggested? Exhaling slowly, I considered our options. Going through official channels could mean months of legal red tape and he said, she said battles. Meanwhile, Eli would suffer. No, we needed a surefire way to take them down swiftly while securing his safety, a way to force their hand and back them into a corner with no escape. I have a friend, I began slowly. From law school, Martha Wilkins. She's made a career handling cases just like this one. Crooked parents trying to milk their kids' inheritance, neglect, you name it. Understanding dawned in Dale's eyes. So you'll get this hotshot lawyer lady to put the screws to Tristan and Nadia? Air all their dirty laundry in court? Among other things, I replied cryptically. Help me gather up all the paperwork. I'll set up a meeting with Martha for tomorrow. Martha's office was as sleek and professional as I remembered, though her warm smile and sharp eyes were the same as ever. Lorraine, it's been too long. She enveloped me in a brief hug before guiding us to a pair of leather chairs. Though I must say, I wish our reunion was under better circumstances. With a sigh, I waved a hand at the boxes of files surrounding us. That's an understatement. Take a look at what we've uncovered about my son and daughter-in-law. For the next 2 hours, Martha pored over our findings with her trademark meticulous intensity. Her brow furrowed deeper with each new layer of depravity revealed, the financial deceptions, signs of blatant neglect, even the account from Nadia's ex-husband. I've heard of money-grubbing parents before, she muttered, shaking her head in disgust. But keeping their own child as a literal prisoner in the name of fleecing his trust fund? That's a new low, even for me. Unconsciously, my fists clenched in my lap. So you'll take the case? Do everything in your power to make sure Tristan and Nadia face the consequences? You don't even need to ask. Martha's expression was one of grim resolve. I'll call in every favor I can to push this through the courts at top speed. We'll bury those two beneath an avalanche of evidence before they know what hit them. She leaned back, fixing me with an intent look. But I'll need your help, too. As Eli's closest living relatives, your testimony and cooperation will be instrumental. I met her gaze steadily. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that boy. A ghost of a smile played across Martha's lips. That's what I wanted to hear. Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and strategy sessions consumed every free moment. Martha was ruthlessly efficient, anticipating every possible angle of defense Tristan and Nadia might attempt. At her urging, I took steps to be appointed as Eli's legal guardian, should we wrest him from their custody. It was a lengthy, draining process, but I gladly endured it all with the goal of giving him a stable home in sight. When at last the court date arrived, armed with a veritable armory of evidence, and flanked by Martha's wily paralegal team, I felt an odd sense of calm. The fireworks would come soon enough. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Dale eyed me sidelong as we strode up the courthouse steps, Eli's small hand encased in mine. In front of the whole family, on his birthday of all days? My jaw set in a stubborn line. It has to be today. They've had this coming for too long. In truth, I'd chosen this date and venue very deliberately. Our entire extended clan would be gathered at Tristan and Nadia's place for Eli's 8th birthday party later. What better way to expose their sins against their own flesh and blood than surrounded by all those they'd deceived? I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the Negligent Parents of the Year award was theirs. Sure enough, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated with the rest of the family when we arrived, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. A tide of expectant murmurs washed over the crowd as the group recognized Martha striding in behind us. Nadia was the first to spot us, her perfectly curated smile slipping ever so slightly. "What's going on here?" Tristan rose to his feet, all artificial joviality. "I should be asking you three the same thing. What's with the hostility, Mom?" Draping a supportive arm around Eli's shoulders, I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. "Maybe you should ask your son about hostility." Confusion rippled through the assembled guests, but Nadia merely rolled her eyes in condescending amusement. "For God's sake, Lorraine, not this again." "Shut your mouth," Dale growled, and I started slightly at the venom in his tone. "You don't get to dismiss her concerns after the sick crap you two pulled." Murmurs intensified, tinged with disbelief and unease. Martha stepped forward, cool and unruffled, as she spread a series of damning dossiers across the table. "We have extensive documentation of your actions towards Elijah, including willful neglect, financial exploitation of his trust fund, and the unjustified deprivation of basic needs." She gestured for silence as shocked gasps erupted around the room. "I'll skip the niceties and give you one opportunity to start making amends. Full custody of the boy will be transferred to Mrs. Hawthorne here immediately, pending the court's final ruling. You'll also repay every cent you siphoned from his accounts." There was a beat of stunned silence as the words sank in. Twin looks of abject horror twisted Tristan and Nadia's faces before morphing into snares of rage. "You've got to be freaking kidding me." Tristan slammed his hands on the table, making several guests jump. "Just because Mom had some stupid delusions about our parenting? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Get off your high horses, both of you." Nadia jutted her chin haughtily, a studied mask of disdain falling into place to conceal her panic. "Our finances are none of your business, nor how we raise our son." My heart clenched at the way she refused to acknowledge Eli as her own. Martha arched an unimpressed eyebrow. "So I'll take that as a refusal to cooperate, then?" "You're damn right." Tristan looked about 2 seconds from vaulting over the table. "We don't have to listen to your self-righteous garbage." On the contrary. Another folder landed on the table with a thud, and the image of a familiar dingy room, harshly illuminated, filled the screen. "You'll find this garbage quite enlightening, I think." A collective gasp rang out through the room as the grim reality set in. Surveillance footage of the tiny closet space where Eli had been imprisoned for days. His tear-stained face and muffled cries were plain as day, surrounded by harsh shadows and stifling walls. Tristan went ashen, mouth working soundlessly as Nadia slumped against her seat, hand fluttering to her mouth. I ground my teeth, fighting back the urge to throttle them both then and there. How dare they look so appalled now, after willingly inflicting such cruel conditions on their own child? The outrage poured forth from our friends and relatives in waves of angry shouting that drowned out all my instincts for vengeance. Because in that moment, the devastated look in Eli's eyes was all I could focus on. He didn't deserve any of this. this ugly airing of family secrets and toxic legacy of betrayal that wasn't his shame to carry. At that moment, I was fiercely glad Martha had taken charge. Her pragmatic ruthlessness spared Eli from having to witness our blistering condemnations of the parents who had so grievously failed him. No, he'd been through enough ugliness. It was time to start looking towards a future of healing. Gathering his slight form against me, I murmured low reassurances into his hair as the chaos swirled around us. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, I realized with a surge of hope. A road towards redemption, away from this poisoned legacy of cruelty and neglect. Tristan and Nadia might have been battles lost, but the war for Eli's soul was just getting started. And this time, I was determined to win. The aftermath of our dramatic confrontation was a whirlwind that still makes my head spin in retrospect. Martha wasted no time, pressing her advantage with cold precision while Tristan and Nadia floundered. Within hours, emergency custody papers were signed and law enforcement was on the scene. Nadia dissolved into hysterics as they slapped cuffs on her wrists, shrieking invectives that would have made a sailor blush. Tristan, for his part, maintained a seething, sullen silence right up until they separated them for booking. Then the dam broke. Staring at me with undisguised loathing, he fought against the officer's restraints like a rabid dog. "You did this," he snarled, spittle flying. "You poisoned everything with your deluded vendetta." "Your actions poisoned this family," I shot back, unflinching even as Dale shifted protectively in front of Eli. "Maybe if you hadn't been so reckless with your son's well-being, so blind to anything but your greed." "He's not yours anymore," Tristan continued ranting, words slurring as his anger spiraled into near incoherency. "You don't get to sweep in and play hero after years of being a lousy, inattentive gur." The backhanded blow caught him square across the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a meaty thwack. Even the officers gave Dale a wide berth as he towered over Tristan's crumpled form, chest heaving like a bellows. "Don't you dare talk about what kind of grandparent she is," he growled through gritted teeth. "When your own twisted minds led you to torment an innocent child for money." Silence fell, heavy as a pall. Tristan glared up at his father through a mask of bloody spittle and swelling flesh, the fight temporarily beaten out of him. With a last contemptuous sneer, Dale shouldered past the stunned officers and came to collect Eli and me. "You did the right thing," he murmured gruffly into my hair as we embraced, the closest to affection he could muster in that moment. "That boy's better off with anyone but those two excuses for human beings." I squeezed him fiercely, the adrenaline high from the confrontation rapidly waning to leave me drained, yet perversely buoyed by our victory. It was done. Eli was finally truly safe. All that remained was ensuring he got the love and care he deserved going forward. And that, I silently vowed, was a battle I would fight with every last breath. With the initial crisis resolved, a strange sort of limbo settled over us in the following weeks. Though the custody papers granted me temporary guardianship of Eli, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. I lost track of how many legal meetings, court dates, and blistering cross-examinations Martha put us through. Every shred of Tristan and Nadia's elaborate tangle of lies was meticulously unpicked, cauterized, and readied as exhibits. The fraud charges alone were damning, given the paper trail of diverted funds from Eli's trust account. But Martha assured me that the abuse charges, locking him away for days at a time, withholding food and necessities, would inevitably result in the maximum sentence. "The system doesn't take kindly to parents who view their own offspring as caged commodities," she said grimly. "We'll see they're made examples of." I could only nod, ignoring the unsettling relish in her tone. Personal feelings aside, Martha was a ruthless ally in this fight, and I wasn't about to argue with results. For his part, Eli remained a subdued shadow throughout the proceedings. Despite our best efforts, he shied away from counseling and group activities, haunted eyes downcast whenever Tristan or Nadia's names arose. "It's going to take time for those wounds to heal," Dale cautioned whenever I fretted over the boy's withdrawal. And rationally, I knew he was right. Overcoming the trauma and emotional scarring inflicted by one's own parents couldn't be undone overnight. But that comprehension did little to ease the mounting guilt and worry gnawing at my heart. Had I failed Eli by not recognizing the signs sooner? All these years of missing holidays and birthdays, could I ever make that up to him now? The answers didn't come easily. But bit by bit, through patience and stubborn determination on both our parts, the walls began to show hairline cracks. It started small. Eli timidly agreeing to color with me one quiet afternoon, while Dale watched his loud courtroom shows, as oblivious to our bonding as ever. From there, we progressed to games of Go Fish and Crazy Eights, my genuine laughter at his horrendous bluffing faces earning the first tiny quirks of his lips. Before long, laughter and chattiness seeped back into the house like a palliative balm after the rolling darkness. I introduced Eli to swimming, his initial trepidation melting into uninhibited glee as he cut through the waters with strong, sure strokes. An art class yielded the first vibrant, unrestrained streaks of color across fresh canvases, and through it all, the fragile bond between us grew stronger with each new smile, each peal of laughter replaying in my mind like a soothing melody. The boy I'd feared was too wounded to recover, blossomed with each day of freedom from his parents' toxic influence. There were still bad days, of course. Triggers that sent Eli retreating into a pensive shell of himself for hours or even days at a time. But we weathered those storms together, side by side, and emerged stronger for it in the end. On one such day, the sun had long since set beyond the den's picture windows before Eli stirred from his hunched position on the couch. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled over and wordlessly crawled into my lap, nestling against me in a contented silence. My breath caught as my arms instinctively folded around his small frame, marveling at the implicit trust in his actions. Setting my chin atop his tousled curls, I let out a shaky sigh, gathering the shreds of composure that loneliness and fresh memories of Tristan's cruelty had frayed. In that moment, gently rocking my grandson, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Him from that haunted, hollowed-out husk I'd first beheld in the closet, and me from the guilt-racked woman tormented over failing to prevent his suffering, holding this quietly content child bruised but not broken by the ugliness he'd endured, filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than I'd ever known. Scars would remain, but they didn't have to define him or me. All that mattered now was nurturing the resilience and fighting spirit, persevering against all odds. And that was a battle I vowed silently into the stillness, that I would fight beside him every single day until my last breath. The night of the sentencing hearing was one I'll never forget. Tristan and Nadia were led in wearing matching orange jumpsuits, hands and feet shackled. Where Nadia had her head bowed in sullen defeat, Tristan met my gaze head-on, with undisguised hatred burning in his eyes. I returned it with a look of cold indifference. He no longer had any power to rattle me. Martha stood ramrod straight beside us, lips pressed into a thin line of grim satisfaction as the judge entered. She'd cautioned us against expecting the maximum sentences, but her reputation preceded her. I had a feeling the so-called justice system wouldn't dare cross her. And I was right. After a mercifully brief recounting of the relevant facts, the hammer came down harder than I dared hope. For the crimes of child abuse, neglect, fraud, and embezzlement against a minor child's trust fund, I sentence you both to 15 years imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Nadia swayed on her feet as if struck, complexion going deathly pale. But my eyes were locked on Tristan, drinking in the dismay and impotent fury twisting his features into an ugly rictus. Additionally, you will be compelled to make full restitution of the stolen funds to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne upon your release. Failure to comply will result in an extension of your sentences. Martha's shark-like smile was triumphant as she caught my eye amid the courtroom din, mouthing, "I told you so." She'd played her gambit flawlessly, as always. Tristan was still yelling his outrage as he was hauled away, vitriol spewing from his lips. But the hatred in his eyes when they met mine burned itself into my memory, searing and indelible. I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching away, because in the end, he and Nadia were the ones vanquished, beaten at their own twisted game by the family whose bond they'd tried to shatter. It was a lesson I hoped haunted their every waking moment behind bars. Eli watched the whole proceeding in numb silence. I ached to pull him close, to shield him from the ugliness being laid so cruelly bare. But he was no longer a scared little boy. He'd borne witness to the depths of human cruelty and prevailed through courage and resilience. This was closure, plain and simple. One last look at the monsters who'd tried so viciously to break him before leaving them behind forever. The drive home passed in a blur, none of us speaking. What words could encapsulate the profound shift this day signified? It was Eli who finally broke the heavy silence as we pulled up to the house, fixing me with those serious green eyes that had seen far too much darkness for one so young. "I'm glad it's really over," he murmured. "That they got what they deserved, you know." I reached across the bench seat to squeeze his hand. "Me too, honey. It's all over now." The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of press, legal wrangling, and celebration from friends and family over our hard-won justice. But the moment that stood out most vividly was Eli's first art show at his new school. He'd been champing at the bit to show me his latest masterpieces, brimming with the pride and excitement of any kid his age. And finally, on opening night, I got to bask in the brilliant splashes of color and rebirth he'd committed to canvas. Each one was a searing reflection of the journey that led us here. Dark, muted tones juxtaposed against explosions of vibrant life. Harsh lines fracturing then melding back together in a mosaic of regeneration. Wordless stories of tragedy and redemption laid bare in acrylic strokes, more poignant than any writer could capture. "That one there is how I felt for a long time," Eli explained, gripping my hand as we moved from canvas to canvas. His voice was contemplative, worlds away from the hollow echoes I'll never unhear from that closet. Scared, sad, like everything was cracking apart into pieces that I couldn't fix. He paused before a canvas emblazoned with a brilliant phoenix taking flight, wings unfurling in a blaze of crimson and gold. "But this one is us now, rising up out of all the ugliness and hurt to start over, finding the color and beauty in life on the other side of the storm." Does that make sense? I pulled him close, blinking back tears of fierce pride and wonder at the resilient, insightful young man he was blossoming into. Another example of the tenacity with which new life can spring from unimaginable darkness. "It makes perfect sense," I murmured into his hair. Because in that moment, bathed in the kaleidoscopic rebirth of his art, I saw the first rays of the new dawn we'd both fought so hard to reach. And as I held him, surrounded by this latest rebirth, one truth became startlingly clear. We would meet each fresh challenge rise over the horizon together, standing united before whatever storms lay ahead. Mother and grandson soldiering onwards into the light.
This story is titled, Canceled the Wedding, when my fiancé secretly invited the person who ruined my career. Now she is begging. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I'm Brian, 31 years old, and 6 months ago, I got engaged to my girlfriend, Lily. We'd been together for 5 years, and I thought we were starting the happiest chapter of our lives. The wedding was planned for next month, but recent events have made me realize just how wrong I was about everything. To understand how it got to this point, you need some context. I have a younger sister, Sarah. She's 28. I haven't spoken to her in over 9 years, and there are good reasons for that. Growing up, Sarah and I just couldn't get along. Our parents tried to force us into some ideal sibling relationship, but all we ever did was clash. Sarah was relentlessly competitive, constantly trying to outdo me in every possible way. I still remember the moment that set the tone for everything. I was 10 and Sarah was 7. I had just won a spelling bee at school, and our parents took us out for ice cream to celebrate. Instead of being happy for me, Sarah had a full-blown meltdown right there in the ice cream shop. She screamed that it wasn't fair and that she could spell better than I could. She demanded that our parents quiz her right then and there, making the entire situation painfully awkward and humiliating. That was just the beginning. As we grew older, her behavior became more insidious. If I got an A on a test, she'd obsessively study until she got an A too. When I was 12, I won a local art competition, and our parents took us out for dinner to celebrate. Instead of being happy for me, Sarah threw a tantrum in the restaurant, screaming that she could draw better. She demanded to show everyone her sketches right then and there, turning what should have been a joyful moment into a scene. That's just one example. This behavior defined our childhood. If I joined the basketball team, suddenly she was all about basketball. When I showed an interest in a girl during high school, Sarah would go out of her way to become her best friend or casually flirt with her. It was maddening. My home, which should have been my sanctuary, felt more like a constant competition. Our parents tried everything to help us find common ground. They even enrolled us in family therapy when I was 16 and Sarah was 13, but she refused to engage. She'd sit there, arms crossed, barely saying a word while the therapist tried unsuccessfully to draw her out. Eventually, the therapist told my parents that unless Sarah was willing to cooperate, there wasn't much else they could do. Things escalated to a breaking point when we were both in our early 20s. I had just graduated college and landed my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm. It was the kind of position I had worked tirelessly for. Great pay, fantastic benefits, and the chance to work on campaigns that could shape the industry. I felt like my years of hard work had finally paid off. Meanwhile, Sarah was still in college, floundering to find her footing. She had changed majors at least 4 times and was on the brink of academic probation, struggling to keep up with deadlines and direction. When I shared the news of my job offer at a family dinner, I expected at least a polite congratulation. Instead, Sarah erupted. Her face twisted with rage, and she started yelling at me, accusing me of being a show-off and always stealing the spotlight. "Why do you always have to be the golden child?" she spat. "Why can't you ever just fail for once so someone else can have a chance?" The words stung, but what really shook me was the look in her eyes, a toxic blend of anger, envy, and bitterness. My parents tried to step in, reassuring her that she had plenty of time to figure things out and that my success didn't diminish her own potential. But Sarah wasn't having it. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard that a picture fell off the wall. Later that night, I overheard her talking to one of her friends on the phone. She was saying things like, "He's not going to keep rubbing this in my face, and I'll make sure he's knocked down a peg or two." I brushed it off as her usual dramatic venting. After all, we'd had our share of sibling spats over the years, and I thought this was just another one of her tantrums. But I couldn't have been more wrong. A few days before I was set to start my new job, I received an email from the HR department at the firm. They had conducted a sudden review of my background based on some disturbing materials that had come to their attention. Apparently, someone had sent them forged emails and screenshots from fake social media accounts, all under my name. These documents contained hateful and discriminatory language, painting me as someone completely unfit for the role. I was stunned and devastated when HR informed me that they were rescinding my offer. The job I had worked so hard to secure was gone in an instant. It didn't take long for me to put the pieces together. Sarah was the only person who knew enough about me to fabricate such personal, damaging content. When I confronted her, she played innocent at first, shrugging off my accusations with an icy smile. But when I pressed harder, her facade cracked. "Maybe you deserve to know what it feels like for once," she finally said, her voice trembling with anger. "You've always been the favorite, the one everyone admires. It's about time you got a taste of failure." Her words left me speechless. My own sister had deliberately sabotaged my future out of jealousy and spite. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a declaration of war. But then she broke down and admitted everything. She'd made the fake accounts, forged the emails, and destroyed my reputation. All because she wanted me to fail at something. There was a twisted pride in her voice, as if she'd finally won some warped competition. I was crushed. This was beyond sibling rivalry. This was a deliberate act of sabotage by my own flesh and blood. I told her I never wanted to see or speak to her again, and walked out of the house that day. I crashed on a friend's couch while I tried to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. In the years that followed, I cut all contact with Sarah. My parents still saw her occasionally, but they knew better than to bring her up around me. Rebuilding my career was an uphill battle. I had to start with a lower-paying job and claw my way back up, but I eventually made it. Now I have a great job, supportive friends, and, until recently, I had Lily. When I met Lily 5 years ago, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. She was kind, funny, and understanding. On our 4th date, I told her everything about Sarah. She listened and sympathized, saying that family relationships could be complicated and that she respected my decision to cut ties. I made one thing crystal clear. Sarah was not to be a part of my life, especially not at my wedding date. At first, Lily seemed to understand, but as we got deeper into planning the wedding, things started to shift. She kept bringing up Sarah, suggesting that maybe it was time to forgive and forget. Every time I shut her down, the thought of seeing Sarah again made my stomach turn. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and having Sarah there would turn it into a nightmare. "Dad," Lily would drop the subject for a while, but I could tell she wasn't happy. It all came to a head last week when we were finalizing the guest list. Lily brought up Sarah again, and this time she refused to back down. I remember the exact moment things unraveled. We were sitting in the living room, the guest list spread out on the coffee table between us. I was already exhausted from a long day at work, and the last thing I wanted was to rehash the same argument we'd been circling for weeks. But Lily was determined. Brian, I really think you should reconsider inviting Sarah, she said, her voice soft, as if she were trying to ease me into it. She's your sister. Don't you think it's time to forgive and move on? I clenched my jaw. This wasn't the first time she'd said those words, but for some reason, they hit me harder this time. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, her eyes full of hope and concern. Or maybe it was the weariness I felt from constantly shutting her down. Either way, the words landed differently that night. Lily, we've talked about this. It's not happening. Having her there will ruin everything. You know what she did to me? Lily sighed, her frustration barely hidden. She said, but it was years ago. People change. Maybe she's different now. Maybe she regrets it. I felt the familiar anger bubbling up. Regrets it? She destroyed my childhood, my career, my reputation. She knew exactly what she was doing. How do you just regret something like that? Her eyes searched mine, looking for some flicker of compromise. I'm not saying what she did was okay. I just think maybe she deserves a chance to make it right. I stared at her in disbelief. Why are you pushing this? Why does she deserve a chance to be at our wedding? Lily's face hardened. Because family is important, Brian. I can't imagine cutting someone off forever. The words stung more than they should have. Family. You think this is about some petty grudge? She didn't steal my toys or read my diary. She sabotaged my entire life. I had to rebuild everything from scratch because of her. She shook her head, her voice growing sharper. You're being stubborn. You're punishing her for a mistake she made when she was young. That did it. I snapped. A mistake. Do you know how humiliating it was to lose that job? To have my name dragged through the mud because my sister couldn't stand that I was doing well. That's not a mistake. Lily, that's cruelty. She crossed her arms and looked away. Maybe she's grown. Maybe she wants to apologize. And maybe I don't care, I shot back. She made her choices, and I made mine. I told you this was a boundary for me. If you can't respect that, then maybe we shouldn't be getting married. Lily's eyes widened in shock. I could see the hurt spread across her face like a shadow. You're seriously saying that over this? She said. And I replied, yes, because it's not just this. It's about trust. You're supposed to be on my side, Lily. You knew how much this meant to me, and you're still trying to push me. We sat there in silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could feel my heart pounding every beat, a painful reminder of how far we'd fallen from the happy couple we were just months ago. Lily whispered, I thought you'd understand. I thought love meant forgiveness. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. Love also means respect, and I can't respect someone who won't respect my boundaries. She didn't say anything after that. She just sat there, her eyes glossy with unshared tears. After what felt like an eternity, she stood up and walked out of the room. I sat there alone, staring at the guest list, the names blurring together as my vision grew. Misty. The next day, things were tense. Lily barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was with clipped, polite sentences. I couldn't stand it. This cold, distant version of her was worse than any shouting match. It felt like a wall had gone up between us, and neither of us knew how to tear it down. I kept telling myself it would blow over. We loved each other. We'd been through so much together. Surely this was just a rough patch, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. Trust had been cracked, and once that happens, it's hard to glue the pieces back together. A week later, everything exploded. I was coming home late from work, exhausted and drained. I walked through the door and immediately noticed Lily sitting at the dining table. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, and the tension in the air was suffocating. Something was wrong. What's going on? I asked cautiously. She took a shaky breath and looked up at me, guilt etched across her face. Brian, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice trembling. My stomach tightened as a sinking feeling began to spread through me. What is this about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I reached out to Sarah, she said, so quietly it was almost a whisper. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard her right. You what? The words came out louder than I intended. I found her on social media a few months ago, she continued, tears welling in her eyes. I've been talking to her. I just wanted to understand what happened between you two, and I invited her to the wedding. It felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. I couldn't breathe. My head buzzed with a dull, deafening roar. You invited her? My voice was barely controlled, trembling with disbelief. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought if she came, maybe you two could finally... No, I cut her off, my voice sharp and shaking with anger. You went behind my back. You did exactly what I told you not to do. You betrayed me. Brian, please, she pleaded, her tears falling freely now. I love you. I was just trying to help. Help? I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and cold. You think this is helping? You knew how I felt. And you did it anyway. This isn't love, Lily. This is manipulation. She reached for me, but I stepped back, my heart fracturing into jagged, painful pieces. Brian, wait, she said, her voice cracking. There's more. I thought she'd changed. I really did. But when I spoke to her, I realized I was wrong. She said, Lily hesitated, as if the words themselves hurt to repeat. She said, "Oh, you're his new girl? How can you even be with such a loser?" My chest tightened, and I clenched my fists. Of course Sarah hadn't changed. Of course she'd lash out, even at someone trying to reach out with kindness. Lily continued, tears streaming down her face. That's when I realized. You were right all along. I was so wrong to reach out, Brian. I thought I was helping, but I only made things worse. I see now how much she hurt you. I'm so sorry. Her words hung heavy in the air, but they did nothing to soften the pain or betrayal I felt in that moment. You should have trusted me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You should have listened when I told you what I needed. Lily sobbed, her face in her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. My heart felt torn apart, and all I could think about was the one person I'd trusted above all had gone behind my back, thinking she knew better than I did. If you can't respect me enough to trust my judgment, then we have nothing left, she cried. Don't say that. We can fix this. I shook my head. The pain was too overwhelming to contain. No, Lily, you broke my trust, and without trust, there's nothing left to fix. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. The air between us felt final, like a door slamming shut on the life we'd built together. I knew it was over, and it hurt more than I could ever put into words. The silence in our apartment was suffocating. After the fight, I spent the night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word we'd exchanged. My mind felt like a storm I couldn't escape. Sleep didn't come, only an endless loop of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. In the cold light of morning, the weight of everything settled on my chest. I could hear Lily moving around the muffled sounds of her packing. I didn't need to ask what she was doing. I knew the life we had built over 5 years was coming apart, and again because of Sarah, and neither of us could stop it. When she finally walked out of the room, her suitcase in hand, our eyes met. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was a quiet resolve in her expression. Are you sure this is what you want, Brian? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. No, Lily, this isn't what I want, but it's what you've left me with. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said, my voice cracking, but that doesn't change what you did. We stood there for a moment, the air between us heavy with everything left unsaid. Then she turned and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind her was a finality I wasn't ready for. I sank onto the couch, the emptiness of the apartment pressing in on me. It felt like the walls were closing in, the silence deafening in its finality. The next few days were a blur. I called off the wedding, officially canceling the venue, the caterers, and the florist. Each call felt like another stab to the heart, like I was dismantling a dream piece by piece. The reactions were mixed. My friends tried to be supportive, though some of them clearly didn't understand. Lily's family, on the other hand, made no effort to hide their anger. Not her mother called me a heartless monster, accusing me of throwing away a perfect relationship over petty sibling drama. Her brother, who I used to be close with, sent me a long, bitter text telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I stared at the screen feeling numb. They didn't know the full story. They didn't understand how deep the hurt went. In the middle of all this, my own family decided to weigh in. My parents called me relentlessly, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to guilt-tripping. My mother's voice was shaky and tearful. Brian, please. This could be a chance to heal the family. Don't let this tear everything apart. But it wasn't me who had torn everything apart. It was Sarah, and now Lily. The people who were supposed to protect me and stand by me had crossed lines I couldn't forgive. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to an email from Sarah. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The subject line simply said, "I'm sorry." The email was long filled with apologies and explanations. She wrote about how she'd spent years in therapy trying to understand her jealousy and resentment. She admitted that what she did to me was unforgivable, but claimed she was a different person now. She wanted to reconnect, to make amends, to be a sister to me again. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Was I supposed to believe that a few years of therapy could erase the pain she'd caused? Could I undo the damage of losing my dream job? The embarrassment? The years of struggle to rebuild my career? The scars ran too deep. I closed the email without responding. I spent the following weekend alone trying to process everything. My mind kept circling back to Lily. I missed her. The way she'd laugh at my dumb jokes, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her passions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the trust we'd had was gone. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about Lily choosing to ignore something I'd made clear from the start, and to do exactly the opposite to prove a point. I went to play basketball, trying to sweat out the frustration. I lifted until my legs burned, focusing on the physical pain instead of the emotional one. Afterward, I sat in my car, drenched in sweat, staring out the windshield. Was I being too stubborn? Was it worth losing Lily over this? But every time I considered reaching out, I remembered the hurt in my chest when she admitted she'd gone behind my back. The feeling of betrayal. The cold realization that the person I loved hadn't respected my boundaries. No matter how much I loved her, that wound was too fresh, too deep. On Tuesday morning, I walked into work feeling like a ghost. My boss, a no-nonsense woman named Ashley, pulled me aside. She'd always been supportive, and today was no different. "You doing okay?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I forced a smile. "I'm getting there." She nodded, studying me for a moment. "Sometimes standing your ground is the hardest thing to do, but it's worth it." Her words stuck with me. I spent the rest of the day lost in code, letting the rhythm of work distract me from the chaos in my mind. By the time I got home, the apartment felt emptier than ever. But for the first time in days, I felt a small sense of peace. I had made the right choice. It didn't make the pain any less real, but at least I hadn't compromised myself. That night, I deleted Sarah's email. I didn't need to read it again. I knew my answer. In the days that followed, life moved on, but it felt like I was standing still. The apartment, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and hollow. Lily's absence was a constant ache. Her side of the closet was empty, the bathroom shelves half bare. I kept catching myself expecting to see her, hearing her voice in the quiet moments, only to be reminded that she was gone. I threw myself into work, using the long hours and challenging projects as a distraction. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the weight of everything lingered. The betrayal, the shattered trust, the future that had slipped through my fingers. All of it followed me like a shadow. Then came the call from my parents. My phone buzzed late one evening, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But something made me pick up. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Brian," she said, her tone cautious. "Please come to dinner this weekend. We need to talk." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, exhaustion seeping into my words. "Please," she pleaded. "It's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe some part of me still hoped they would understand, that they'd finally see my side of things. But deep down, I knew I was setting myself up for disappointment. Saturday evening came, and I drove to my parents' house, my stomach in knots. The memories of my childhood home felt different now, tinged with a sadness I couldn't shake. As I walked up the steps, I took a deep breath, bracing myself. The door opened, and my mom greeted me with a forced smile. "I'm so glad you came," she said softly, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a plea than comfort. I stepped inside and immediately sensed something was off. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. And then I saw her, Sarah, sitting at the dining table. Her eyes met mine, wide with something that almost looked like regret. A cold wave of anger rushed through me. "What is she doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Brian, please," my dad said, his expression pained. "We just want to help you make peace." "What is wrong with everyone? You did this behind my back," I said, the betrayal hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You ambushed me." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We thought if you two just talked, you could finally heal." I shook my head, my hands clenched into fists. "You don't get it. You never have." "Brian, wait," Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling. "I just want to apologize." Her words fell on me like empty noise. I turned to my parents, bitterness rising in my throat. "You're still trying to fix something that's broken beyond repair. You can't force this." My dad's voice cracked. "We just want our family back. This is your family now," I said, my voice hard. "Where trust doesn't matter. Where betrayal is swept under the rug." I turned toward the door, the weight of finality heavy on my shoulders. "I told you where I stood. If you can't respect that, then I don't know what else to say." I walked out, my heart pounding in my ears. My mom's sobs followed me down the steps, but I didn't look back. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt clear. The lines had been drawn. I didn't cross theirs, and I wouldn't let them cross mine. That night, I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. My phone buzzed with texts from my parents, Sarah, even Lily. They probably even told her about this. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to respond, to explain myself again, to justify my pain. I'd done that enough. When I finally got home, the emptiness of the apartment no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like space. I could breathe in. I was tired of holding on to relationships that hurt me, of trying to fit pieces together that no longer matched. I spent the next few days in quiet reflection. I knew I had burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt, but there was also a strange sense of freedom in it. I wasn't carrying the weight of others' expectations anymore. I wasn't obligated to forgive someone who hadn't earned it. One evening, I decided to meet up with some friends. They'd been worried about me, and I figured it was time to step out of the shadows. We went to a small bar downtown, the kind of place where the music was low and the conversation could flow. As I sipped my drink and listened to their laughter, I realized how much I had isolated myself. The world hadn't ended because my engagement did. Life kept moving, and so could I. Later that night, as we were leaving, my friend Sam clapped me on the shoulder. "You did the right thing, man," he said. "It takes guts to stand up for yourself." I nodded, a small smile forming for the first time. I believed it. Standing my ground had cost me, but losing myself would have cost more. The next morning, I went for a walk along the beach. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the morning sun reflected off the water in shimmering golden hues. I took a deep breath, letting the salty sea air fill my lungs. There was still hurt, still loss, but there was also hope. I was finally free to build a life where my boundaries were respected, where I didn't have to compromise my peace for the sake of someone else's idea of family. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was okay with that. One step at a time. I would figure it out. The days stretched into weeks, and life settled into a new rhythm. I wasn't the same person I'd been before the breakup, but I was starting to feel more grounded. There was a strange peace in the quiet, in the simplicity of focusing on myself. It felt like I was slowly rebuilding the foundations of my life. Not for anyone else, just for me. I spent more time with friends, people who accepted me for who I was. We explored hidden trails through the coastal cliffs, sat around bonfires on cool evenings, and shared stories that reminded me what real connection felt like. These friendships were honest, untainted by expectations or betrayal. They gave me the strength to keep moving forward. At work, things were steady. I threw myself into projects, taking on challenges that pushed me to grow. My boss, Denise, noticed the change in me. One day, she pulled me aside after a meeting. "You've been doing great, Brian," she said, a smile on her face. "I can see the focus in you. Keep it up." I nodded, feeling a spark of pride. Her words reminded me that despite everything, I was still capable, still driven. My past hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger. One weekend, I decided to clear out the apartment. It was time to let go of the things that tied me to what used to be. As I went through the drawers and closets, I found remnants of my relationship with Lily. A stray earring, an old movie ticket stub, a half-written grocery list in her handwriting. Each item carried a memory, a flicker of what we had. But instead of drowning in nostalgia, I let each one go. I placed them in a box, sealed it, and set it aside. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to move forward without the weight of what could have been. The apartment felt different, cleaner, lighter. It was finally my space. I rearranged the furniture, added a few plants, and hung up new artwork. These small changes made a big difference. The space felt like a reflection of who I was now, not who I used to be. One evening, as I cooked dinner, a new hobby I was slowly getting better at, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "We miss you. Please talk to us when you're ready." I stared at the message for a long time. The hurt from the dinner ambush still lingered, but I also knew my parents weren't bad people. They just didn't understand the depth of my pain, the boundaries I needed to protect myself. I didn't reply right away. I needed more time, and that was okay. Healing didn't have to be rushed. A few weeks later, I was at a rooftop party in downtown Austin when I met someone new. Her name was Emily. She had an easy smile and a way of making conversation feel effortless. We talked about everything, from favorite books to road trips to the best barbecue spots in Texas. She didn't pry about my past or ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just enjoyed the moment with me. That was refreshing. I didn't need to explain myself or defend my boundaries. I could just be. As the sunset turned the sky shades of orange and purple, Rachel turned to me and smiled. "Feel like grabbing a milkshake?" she asked. I chuckled. "Sure, as long as I don't have to sing karaoke." She laughed, and in that moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the rush of falling in love. It was the quiet comfort of knowing that maybe, just maybe, new beginnings were possible. That night, as I walked back into my apartment, I realized something. I wasn't over everything that had happened. The scars from Sarah's betrayal and Lily's broken trust were still there. But those scars didn't define me. They were just part of my story. I was stronger now, more aware of what I needed and deserved. I knew that I couldn't control other people's actions, but I could control how I responded to them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with my choices. I stood by the window, gazing out at the Austin skyline. The world was still moving, and so was I. The path ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. I had boundaries, self-respect, and a clearer sense of who I was. Sometimes standing your ground means losing people you love, but in the end, it also means finding yourself. And that's a trade I was finally willing to make. This story is titled, Parents Throw Me Out, just before my sats because my golden sister wants to accommodate. Hey everyone! The channel's been slowing down a bit, and I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now, let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey, I'm 17, and my life is officially a shit show right now. I've been prepping for the SATs for what feels like forever. You know, those stupid standardized tests that supposedly decide your entire future. Every day for months, I've been grinding through practice tests, flashcards, all that crap. My brain is fried, and I've been counting down the days until I can just get it over with. But then my family decided to absolutely fuck me over. And when I say family, I mean my sister Kelly, the queen of everything, and my parents, her loyal minions. Here's the deal. Kelly's getting married in 2 weeks. Big fancy wedding, the whole shebang. Fine, whatever, not my problem. Or at least, it wasn't until she announced that her 7 friends were flying in and needed somewhere to stay. And apparently, the only solution they could come up with was to kick me out of the house so her friends could have my room. Yes, you read that right. 7 fully grown adults are going to be crammed into our house. And the only way to make that work is for me to pack up my shit and leave. My parents didn't even have the decency to tell me ahead of time. Nope, they just casually dropped the bomb the night before her friends were supposed to arrive. I'd just finished a long-ass day of studying, and they sat me down like, oh, by the way, you need to pack up your stuff and be out by tomorrow. You're going to stay with your Aunt Linda for the next 2 weeks. I was like, wait, what? They explained that Kelly had promised her friends they'd stay at our house and that it was too late to change plans. My first thought was, why the hell didn't they just get a hotel? Kelly's wedding is costing a fortune. She's got catering, a DJ, custom decorations, all that. Couldn't they have spent a little more to book a room or two for her friends? I said exactly that, and my mom just sighed like I was being a brat. Hotels are expensive, and this is family. We're being hospitable. First of all, those are her friends, not family. Second, I didn't even know they were coming until 5 minutes ago. I tried to argue. I told them I couldn't just up and leave right before the SATs. Staying with Aunt Linda was going to completely screw me over. Her house is way out in the suburbs, nowhere near my testing center. And on top of that, Aunt Linda is a weirdo. She doesn't believe in Wi-Fi. Seriously, who even lives like that? So I'd be stuck burning through my data to study. But my parents didn't care. They were just like, you can take your books with you. You don't need the internet to study. Are you kidding me? I'm not prepping for a spelling bee here. The SATs are brutal. I need every resource I can get. And my parents are acting like I should be fine with a pencil and notebook. So then I suggested a compromise. I'd stay in the living room instead of giving up my room completely. There's plenty of space, and I could still have access to my study materials. Win-win, right? Wrong. My dad shut that down immediately. It's not appropriate to have guests sleeping in the living room when we have a full house. They're Kelly's friends, and they deserve to be comfortable. I swear I almost lost it right then and there. Like, am I not part of this family? Does my comfort not matter? I even brought up the fact that Kelly and Ryan, her fiancé, have their own apartment. Wouldn't it make more sense for her friends to stay there? But apparently, Kelly decided her apartment was off limits because she didn't want the stress of hosting people right before her wedding. Oh, but it's totally fine to dump that stress on me. At this point, I was getting desperate. I begged my parents to reconsider. I told them I couldn't afford to lose this much time so close to the SATs. I even offered to split the living room with her friends, just so I could stay in the house. But nope, my mom hit me with, we've made our decision. Don't be selfish, okay? This is Kelly's big moment, and we need to support her. Selfish. They called me selfish for not wanting to be kicked out of my own home. I kept pushing back, and that's when things got ugly. My dad finally snapped and said, if you don't pack your things and leave by tomorrow, we'll throw all your stuff out on the street. That was it. I couldn't argue anymore. They'd made up their minds, and nothing I said was going to change it. So I went to my room and started packing. I was so pissed I could barely think straight. I mean, how is this even real? How do you look at your own kid, someone who's working their ass off to get into college, and decide, Yeah, let's kick them out so our daughter's friends can have a sleepover? A couple hours later, my mom came in all cheerful, like, we're so proud of you for making the right decision. This is a big sacrifice, but it shows you're willing to put family first. I didn't even respond. I just kept packing. Then she said, oh, by the way, you'll need to call Aunt Linda yourself to let her know you're coming. We haven't talked to her about this yet. Wait, what? They hadn't even asked Aunt Linda if I could stay with her. They just assumed she'd be fine with it and left it to me to figure out. That was the final straw. I completely lost it. I started yelling, asking how they could do this to me. And you know what my mom said? You're almost an adult. It's time you learn to take care of yourself. Almost an adult? I'm 17. And even if I was 18, they're still my parents. Isn't it literally their job to take care of me? At this point, I realized arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere. I'd already wasted too much energy trying to convince them to care about me, and it wasn't working, so I decided to stop playing nice. I started unpacking my bags and told them, I'm not going anywhere. You'll have to drag me out of here if you want me gone. That's when my dad stormed in and started yelling. He said I was being a brat and that I needed to grow up. My mom chimed in with some bullshit about how Kelly's friends deserve better treatment because they're guests. So after my parents completely failed me, I did something I probably should have known better than to try. I called Kelly. I was sitting on my bed, surrounded by half-packed bags, trying to wrap my head around how fucked my life was about to get. I thought, maybe, just maybe, she'll have an ounce of humanity and help me out. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. Kelly and I have never been close. Scratch that. We can't stand each other. She's always been the golden child, and I've always been the problem. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. She's the favorite, the one who never does anything wrong, while I'm the one who gets blamed for breathing too loudly. But I figured desperate times, right? So I called her. The moment she picked up, she sounded annoyed, like I'd interrupted some earth-shattering wedding task. I said, Kelly, I need to talk to you. Mom and Dad are making me leave so your friends can stay in the house, and it's totally screwing me over. Her response? A loud, dramatic sigh. You know the kind. The, ugh, why are you even bothering me with this? Sigh, but I kept going. I told her how important the SATs were, how Aunt Linda's place wasn't a good fit for studying, how far it was from my testing center, and how unfair it was that I had to leave my own home so her friends could crash here. That's when she hit me with the most cold-hearted, villain-level bullshit I've ever heard in my life. Put me on speaker, she said. I hesitated for a second, but did it. My parents were standing nearby, probably listening in anyway, so I figured, why not? Once she knew they could hear, she said, let me make this really clear. I promised my friends they could stay there, and I'm not breaking that promise. I don't care about your SATs, your studying, or any of your whining. If you don't have anywhere to go, then maybe you should just live on the streets. Live on the streets. She actually said that. And my parents? They didn't say a word. Not one word. They just stood there, letting her talk to me like that. She hung up right after, and I stood there in stunned silence. I couldn't believe it. Not only did she not give a single fuck about how this was going to affect me, but she also went out of her way to humiliate me in front of our parents. And the worst part? They didn't defend me. They didn't even look uncomfortable. That's when it hit me. I wasn't family to them. Not really. Kelly was the star, the center of their universe, and I was just there. I thought about arguing some more, but what was the point? I already knew how this was going to play out. So, without saying another word, I finished packing my stuff and left the room. When I got back to my room, I sat on my bed and stared at my phone. I felt like I was in some fucked up movie. Like, who even says that to their own sibling? Who tells a 17-year-old to live on the streets because they can't be bothered to find a better solution? I didn't cry. I was too angry for that. But I did feel this deep, gut-wrenching ache in my chest, like I'd finally hit my limit with these people. It wasn't just about this one situation. It was everything. Every time I'd been ignored. Every time Kelly had been prioritized. Every time I'd been made to feel like I didn't matter. It all came rushing back at once. And the worst part? I still had no plan. My parents clearly weren't going to back down, and Kelly definitely wasn't going to help me. I couldn't go to Aunt Linda's because I knew I wouldn't survive 2 weeks there, especially not before the SATs. That's when I decided to text my best friend, Sarah. Sarah and I have been best friends since middle school. She knows pretty much everything about my family. The favoritism, the constant put-downs, the way Kelly treats me like an inconvenience. She's heard it all. So when I texted her, "Can I stay with you for a while?" Long story, I'll explain later. Her response was immediate. Of course. Are you okay? I wasn't okay, but I didn't want to dump everything on her all at once. So I just said, I'll explain when I get there. Within an hour, I was out the door with my bags and heading to Sarah's place. My parents barely even acknowledged me as I left. My dad just said, "Good, you're making the right decision," like I was doing them a favor by getting the hell out. When I got to Sarah's house, her mom answered the door. She took one look at me and said, "What happened?" I hadn't planned on breaking down, but as soon as I stepped inside, it all came pouring out. The SATs, the forced eviction, Kelly's cruel phone call, it all spilled out in a jumble of words and anger. Sarah and her mom listened without interrupting, and by the time I finished, I felt a little lighter. Sarah's mom didn't even hesitate. She said, "You can stay here as long as you need to. We'll figure it out." That night, I slept in Sarah's guest room, surrounded by quiet and kindness. Two things I wasn't used to. I felt like a burden, sure, but at least I wasn't being actively ignored or insulted. It toughened sacrifice. The next few days were a blur. I focused on studying for the SATs, trying to push everything else out of my mind. It wasn't easy. Every time I tried to concentrate, Kelly's voice would pop into my head, "Go live on the streets." But Sarah was there for me every step of the way. She made sure I had space to study, brought me snacks when I forgot to eat, and even helped me review some practice questions. Her parents were just as amazing, constantly checking in and making sure I had everything I needed. It was a weird feeling. For the first time in forever, I felt supported. By the time SAT day rolled around, I was running on adrenaline and sheer determination. I wasn't going to let Kelly or my parents ruin this for me. I took the test, and honestly, I think I did pretty damn well considering everything. After the SATs were over, I spent a whole day decompressing. Well, trying to. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened. Kelly's words, my parents' apathy, and the sheer unfairness of it all just kept cycling through my head like a broken record. I realized I wasn't angry just because they kicked me out. It was deeper than that. I'd spent my whole life being treated like the afterthought of the family. Every damn time something came up, Kelly was their priority. Whether it was birthdays, school events, or even just normal family dinners, everything revolved around her. And this felt like the ultimate slap in the face. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do about it. Part of me just wanted to shove it all down, keep my head down, and move on. But another part of me, the part that was sick and tired of being treated like garbage, wanted to do something. That's when I thought of Ryan. Ryan and I weren't exactly close, but we'd spent a decent amount of time around each other since he and Kelly got engaged. He always seemed like a nice enough guy, though I sometimes wondered what he saw in her. I mean, Kelly isn't exactly known for her sparkling personality. I debated for hours about whether or not to reach out to him. On the one hand, it wasn't really his business. On the other hand, he was about to marry someone who'd literally told her own sibling to go live on the streets. Didn't he deserve to know what he was getting into? Finally, I decided to go for it. I wasn't trying to ruin their relationship or anything. I just wanted him to know the truth. I sat down and typed out a message. "Hey Ryan, this is probably super weird, but I need to tell you something about what's been happening at home. I'm not trying to cause drama, but I think you should know about the way Kelly's been treating me. I'm not sure if she's mentioned it, but I've been kicked out of the house because her friends are staying here for the wedding. I've been studying for the SATs for months, and they decided last minute that I had to leave so her friends could have my room. I told her how much it was screwing me over, and she straight up told me to live on the streets. I'm not saying this to make you mad or anything. I just think you should know what kind of person she is before you marry her. If you want to talk more about it, I'm here." I read it over a dozen times before hitting send. My hands were shaking the entire time. I had no idea how he was going to react, or if he'd even respond at all. "Itu Wakadri," Ryan replied within an hour. "Hey, my name. I'm really sorry to hear about everything you're going through. Kelly hadn't told me anything about this. Can we meet up or talk on the phone? I want to hear the whole story." I was surprised he took it so seriously. I guess I half expected him to brush it off or defend Kelly, but he seemed genuinely concerned. We agreed to talk on the phone that night. When he called, I laid it all out for him. I told him about how I'd been preparing for the SATs, how my parents had given me less than 24 hours to pack up and leave, how Kelly had told me to live on the streets, and how none of them cared about the impact it was having on me. Ryan didn't say much while I was talking. He just listened, and I could tell he was getting angrier by the minute. By the time I finished, there was a long pause before he finally spoke. Wow. I don't even know what to say. That's not okay. At all. I could hear the frustration in his voice. He asked me a few more questions. How long this had been going on, whether my parents had tried to reach out to me, And if there were other incidents like this in the past, I didn't hold back. I told him about the years of favoritism, the way Kelly had always gotten away with treating me like crap, and how my parents had never once stood up for me. When the call ended, Ryan thanked me for being honest and said he needed some time to process everything. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I had a feeling things were about to blow up. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of texts and missed calls from my parents. Apparently, Ryan had confronted Kelly about everything, and shit hit the fan. From what I heard later, the fight started with Ryan calmly asking Kelly why I'd been kicked out of the house. She tried to brush it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that I was overreacting. But Ryan wasn't buying it. He pressed her, and eventually she admitted that she just didn't want me around. She said having me in the house would have been too stressful for her, and she didn't think it was a big deal since I could just stay somewhere else. When Ryan brought up the live on the streets comment, she apparently laughed it off like it was a joke. That's when he snapped. He told her she was selfish, heartless, and that he couldn't believe she'd treat her own sibling like that. Things escalated quickly, and by the end of the night, Ryan told her he couldn't go through with the wedding. When my parents called me, they were livid. "This is all your fault," my mom yelled. "Do you know what you've done? The wedding's off because of you." I tried to explain that all I did was tell Ryan the truth, but they weren't having it. They demanded I call him and fix it. "Fix what?" I snapped. "He made his decision because of her actions, not mine. If Kelly wants to save her relationship, maybe she should try apologizing for once in her life." They hung up on me after that. The fallout was even messier than I expected. Kelly was hysterical. She tried to spin the story to make it look like I was the bad guy, but no one was buying it, not even her closest friends. Apparently, Ryan had already told his family what happened, and they were fully on his side. As for me, I felt conflicted. On the one hand, I didn't mean to blow up her life, but on the other hand, she'd brought it on herself. All I did was tell the truth, and if that was enough to make Ryan rethink their entire relationship, maybe it wasn't as strong as Kelly thought. At the end of the day, I didn't regret reaching out to him. For once, someone in my family was being held accountable for their actions, and it felt damn good. After Ryan called off the wedding, my life got significantly messier. You'd think that being away from my parents and Kelly would mean I could finally catch a break, but nope. The fallout from all this hit me like a damn tsunami. First, there was my parents. They weren't just pissed, they were out for blood. They must have called me 20 times in one day, alternating between screaming at me and trying to guilt trip me into fixing the situation. "Do you realize how much money we've spent on this wedding?" my mom shrieked during one of her rants. "All of it down the drain because of your little stunt." As if it was my fault Kelly was a heartless jerk. My dad wasn't any better. His angle was all about family loyalty. He kept going on about how I was supposed to support Kelly, not tear her down. He even accused me of being jealous, which was laughable. What the hell was I supposed to be jealous of? Her massive ego? Her ability to manipulate everyone around her? When I wouldn't cave, my parents started sending flying monkeys after me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. I got bombarded with texts and calls from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Some of them were polite but insistent, saying I should try to smooth things over for the sake of the family. Others were downright nasty, calling me selfish, immature, and in one case, a spiteful little brat. But here's the thing. Not everyone bought into their narrative. Turns out, Ryan didn't just confront Kelly. He told his whole family why he was calling off the wedding. And unlike my parents, his family wasn't about to sweep it under the rug. Within days, the story started spreading. My parents were furious, accusing me of ruining our reputation. They didn't seem to grasp that the more they tried to control the narrative, the worse it made them look. I started getting messages from extended family members, people who weren't part of the Flying Monkey Brigade. Some of them apologized for how I'd been treated, and a few even said they'd noticed the favoritism over the years, but hadn't known how bad it was. It was weird, having people suddenly acknowledge what I'd been dealing with my whole life. But honestly, the most satisfying messages came from Ryan's family. His sister reached out to me personally and thanked me for speaking up. She said they'd always had reservations about Kelly, but didn't want to interfere. Apparently, my story was the final confirmation they needed. Meanwhile, Kelly was imploding. Her social media turned into a pity party overnight. She posted vague statuses about being betrayed by people she trusted and losing everything. Of course, she left out the part where she told her little sister to live on the streets. Her friends weren't buying it, though. A few of them started commenting things like, "This isn't the whole story, is it?" And, "What about my name?" It wasn't long before Kelly turned off the comments altogether. I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to reconcile with Ryan. She even showed up at his place unannounced, but he refused to let her in. Apparently, he told her that unless she apologized to me and fixed things with our family, there was no chance they'd get back together. Of course, Kelly being Kelly, she refused to apologize. She told him she didn't owe me anything and accused him of overreacting. That's when he officially ended things. Back at Sarah's house, I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. Her parents had been nothing but supportive, even after hearing about all the chaos I'd inadvertently caused. Sarah joked that I was like a live-action soap opera, but in a way that made me laugh instead of cringe. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. Not for telling Ryan the truth. I stood by that 100%, but for the way everything had spiraled afterward. It wasn't my intention to destroy Kelly's wedding or blow up her relationship. All I'd wanted was for someone, anyone, to see what I'd been dealing with. One night, Sarah's mom sat me down and said something that really stuck with me. "Sweetheart, this isn't your fault. You didn't create this mess. Your family did. All you did was hold up a mirror and they didn't like what they saw." That was the first time in a long while that I felt validated. A few days later, my grandparents showed up. They'd been on my side from the beginning, but seeing them in person was a whole different kind of comfort. They didn't waste any time. Within an hour of arriving, my grandpa was on the phone with my parents, laying down the law. He told them in no uncertain terms that I wasn't coming back to their house and that they needed to figure out their priorities. "Your daughter isn't a piece of furniture you can move around whenever it's convenient," he said. I didn't hear my parents' response, but I'm guessing it wasn't pleasant because my grandpa hung up looking pissed. My grandparents also started making arrangements for my future. They offered to take full custody of me, which was honestly a relief. They told me I could stay with them once I graduated high school, and they'd even help me with college expenses. Hearing that was like a weight being lifted off my chest. For the first time, I felt like I had a solid plan, a way to move forward without depending on people who clearly didn't give a damn about me. As for Kelly, she's been radio silent. I haven't heard a word from her since Ryan ended things, and honestly, I'm fine with that. From what I've gathered, she's still trying to spin the situation in her favor, but it's not working. Too many people know the truth now, and her victim act isn't holding up. I'd like to say I feel bad for her, but I don't. Not really. She made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not trapped under her shadow anymore. With my grandparents stepping in and taking charge, I finally started to feel like I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. It's wild how much can change when someone actually gives a damn about you. For the first time in years, I felt like things might actually turn out okay. But that doesn't mean everything magically got better overnight. After my grandparents' phone call with my parents, the dust hadn't exactly settled. My parents tried to play the victim card, claiming I was turning the whole family against them. My mom apparently told my grandparents that I manipulated the situation and exaggerated everything just to make them look bad. My grandpa wasn't having it. He told them flat out, "If your version of being a good parent involves throwing your kid out for a wedding, then maybe you deserve to look bad." That was the last time they spoke directly. My grandparents told me that as far as they were concerned, my parents had forfeited their right to be part of my life. Meanwhile, I was adjusting to living at Sarah's house full-time. It wasn't exactly how I imagined my senior year of high school going, but her family made it as smooth as possible. Sarah's parents even sat me down one night to talk about the future. They wanted to make sure I felt secure and knew that I wasn't overstaying my welcome. I broke down a little when they said, "You're not just a guest. You're family now." Hearing that was something I didn't even realize I needed. I started to feel lighter, like I wasn't carrying everything on my own anymore. Sarah and I got into a routine, studying together, watching dumb shows on Netflix, and just hanging out like normal teenagers. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. At school, though, things were complicated. Word about the wedding fiasco spread fast, and it wasn't long before classmates started asking questions. I'm not sure how much they knew, but enough to start whispering about me in the hallways. "Did you hear she got her sister's wedding canceled?" "Yeah, I heard her sister's fiance dumped her because of something she said." I tried to ignore it, but let's be real. It sucked. I wasn't exactly popular to begin with, and this just made me feel even more isolated. Sarah, bless her, went full protective mode. She shut down any rumors she overheard and even confronted a group of kids who were making jokes about me. It was embarrassing, but also kind of sweet. She kept reminding me, "They don't know the whole story. Fault them." On the home front, my grandparents weren't wasting any time. They started working on the legal process to transfer custody, which meant more phone calls with lawyers and family members. My dad, in a last-ditch effort to save face, tried to guilt-trip them by saying, "You're breaking up the family." My grandma fired back, No, you did that the moment you chose to abandon your daughter. I overheard the call, and I couldn't help but feel this weird mix of pride and sadness. It was comforting to have someone standing up for me, but it also drove home how much my parents had failed me. Eventually, they signed the papers, and just like that, my grandparents officially had custody of me. Once that was settled, my grandparents started planning for what came next. They wanted me to move in with them as soon as the school year ended, but they left the decision up to me. I told them I wanted to stay with Sarah until graduation. As much as I loved my grandparents for stepping up, Sarah and her family had become my safe space, and I wasn't ready to leave just yet. They were totally fine with that, and even promised to visit as often as they could. In the meantime, my grandparents started making arrangements for college. They'd always been good with money, and they assured me I wouldn't have to worry about tuition or living expenses. It was a massive weight off my shoulders. As for Kelly, well, let's just say things weren't looking too great for her. Ryan had officially moved on. From what I heard, he'd started seeing someone new. Someone who wasn't a manipulative brat, apparently. Kelly, on the other hand, was still trying to claw her way back into everyone's good graces. She posted a long, dramatic rant on social media about how she was misunderstood and how people shouldn't judge her without knowing the full story. It didn't take long for the comments to flood in, most of them calling her out for being fake. My favorite comment? If you're misunderstood, then why did your fiancé dump you a week before the wedding? Seems like he understood you perfectly. She deleted the post after that. I still haven't spoken to Kelly or my parents, and honestly, I don't plan to. Blocking them was probably the best decision I've ever made. There's a part of me that wonders if they'll ever apologize, but I'm not holding my breath. If there's one thing this whole mess has taught me, it's that I don't need their approval. Or anyone's, really. Looking ahead, things are finally starting to feel hopeful. I'm doing well in school, I've got solid plans for college, and I'm surrounded by people who actually care about me. It's weird to think about how much has changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, I felt completely powerless. Now, I feel like I'm finally in control of my life. To everyone who's been following this story and offering advice, thank you. Seriously, you've all reminded me that I'm not alone. Even when things feel impossible, here's to moving forward.